but I'm sure you're going to see it right away.
And Director of National Intelligence, DNI John Ratcliffe, has a strong warning for Joe Biden. But will he listen?
Yes, but first, let's get to that video that was presented at yesterday's hearing, which was held by Georgia's Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. What happened is pretty stunning. Like you said, Steve, what we're going to watch is the room that these folks probably did not know was being videotaped, because this was actually the arena's security system. So they were probably not aware. I'll let the attorney in charge explain it, and then we'll come back and chat about it. Here it is.
Pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids at about 8:22 a.m. in the morning. So she put that table there. So the same person who's staying behind now, the same person who cleared the place out under the pretense that we're going to stop counting, is the person who put the table there at 8:22 in the morning. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table. Yeah, upper right hand, you see the gentleman in the red. So he just pulled one out.
So let's explain what happened there. Those suitcases were under that table. No one seems to have known about them all day long. This is, of course, video that just came out yesterday. They have just watched it themselves for the first time, haven't gone through the 14 hours worth of tape, just kind of fast forwarded. Saw this, it seemed very suspicious, and it is, because these folks sent everyone home. They said, we are done counting for the night, come back at 8 a.m. We're totally finished. They sat down, everybody left. These 4 people sat down, acted as though they were done working for the night. I think there were actually 6 people that were left there. As soon as everybody clears the building, you see them buzzing around. They pull these suitcases, 4 suitcases, out from underneath this skirted table. There's a skirt all the way around, as you can see there. Pull these 4 suitcases, which they estimate could potentially hold 6,000 ballots apiece, 4 or 5 scanners going for the next 2.5 hours with these ballots. Those scanners can actually scan about 3,000 ballots an hour. So if you do the math, that is that night in and of itself throws the election. But let me tell you what Facebook has to say about it, because this is, if you were just watching on Facebook and you're looking at this, Team Trump actually posted this. Let's put that up there so folks can see. It says false information, and when you click through, it will actually tell you that it's false information because this has been proven to be false. Steve, shocking, because it's the first time anyone has ever seen this video.
I agree with you, Tudor B. Here's the deal. State Farm Arena had the security cameras in place. There's about 14 and a half hours on this tape. Jackie Pick is the attorney here, and she said they only had a chance to scan through the video fast a couple of times. They fast forwarded, they found this suspect portion of it, and it raised a lot of eyebrows, as you can imagine. Again, 6,000 ballots potentially per suitcase. They can process 3,000 ballots per hour in the tabulating machines, and if you do the math, that means 24,000 ballots could have gone through easily in the 2.5 hours that they remained unsupervised from 10:30 at night until 1 o'clock in the morning. And again, you have to ask yourself, why would anybody be sent home in the middle of the night, in the middle of a count? It doesn't happen in Florida or Texas or Ohio, in places where they have no real election problems. It just seems to happen in places that are contested now. As a result of this, Governor Brian Kemp in the state of Georgia says it's time for a audit of the signatures on the ballots. Time to go back and do a hand audit of signatures. He's calling on the Secretary of State's office there in Georgia to conduct a signature audit of ballots after allegations of fraud in Georgia. The reason being, he says, this changes everything. And he says it's a smoking gun. Here's part of what was said.
Senator Loeffler, I called early on for a signature audit. Obviously, the Secretary of State, per the laws and the Constitution, would have to order that. He has not done that. I think it should be done. I think, especially with what we saw today, it raises more questions. There needs to be transparency on that. I would again call for that, and I think in the next 24 hours, hopefully we'll see a lot more from the hearings that the legislature had today, and we'll be able to look and see what the next steps are.
Brian Kemp's comments, by the way, Tudor, enough to temper, at least for now, some anger from the right, from Republicans and conservatives who say, Republicans, what are you doing in Georgia? It looks like maybe they're getting some attention now.
Yeah, I actually want to head out to Georgia to see what the temperature is there on the ground. We've got Heather Mullins out there. She was at the hearing yesterday. Heather, what is happening on the ground there in Georgia?
Well, other than it being very cold out here in Georgia, a lot is happening on the ground. At these hearings yesterday, I actually had the chance to talk to several people that were witnesses. Not even all of the witnesses had a chance to testify just because there was so much going on, especially in Fulton County. Now, interesting enough, the election director in Fulton County, Rick Barron, did not show up, even though he was asked by the Senate committee to testify. Somebody actually apologized on his behalf from the office, saying that he got tied up doing reconciliation for the rescan that the deadline was the night before. And so he didn't come yesterday, but who did come from Fulton County was the chair of the Board of Commissioners, Rob Pitts. Now, he spoke in the morning before this video broke, before we heard affidavits and testimony from witnesses, and he actually said Fulton County, he gave an A+ for how they handled the election. And then it was just an hour later that we see this breaking video of people scanning in ballots essentially after hours, after observers were told to go home. Now, if it wasn't for those two GOP observers who reached out to the Trump campaign with this affidavit saying, hey, we stuck around, we weren't allowed back in, and there were still 4 people there up until 1 o'clock in the morning, they never would have reached out to State Farm Arena requesting that footage. And so this is a really big deal, not just because of that, but because we also heard from witnesses after the fact. One, a woman named Bridget, who testified that her job was to print test ballots on official voter roll paper, and that those ballots subsequently went missing, and that there was no difference between those test ballots and real ballots, and that they were stored in a warehouse that was completely run by Dominion. She was the only one there not from Dominion, and that there was no security. So at any point in time, anyone could transfer ballots in or out of that warehouse. And then right after her, a woman testifies that she's a counter and came across a stack of ballots that looked like they were printed. So a lot that does not make sense, Tudor.
Heather Mullins, will check back in with you later on. Steve, it all sounds very suspicious. We have a lot of people coming out today and saying there's nothing to see here. I think it's going to be harder and harder to continue that narrative.
Yeah, the whole idea that there is no evidence is simply not holding water. I mean, too many affidavits, thousands around the country now, not just in Georgia, but in all of the 6 contested states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin. A pile of evidence. You'll see more of that coming out in Nevada today. Meanwhile, DNI John Ratcliffe, the director of national intelligence, says that it's China we need to be most worried about. And China may have played a role in some of this gamesmanship, we're also told. Here's what DNI Ratcliffe had to say. Listen in.
What is your message on China to the Biden team?
They're our greatest adversary. We need to recognize China for the threat that they are. It's the greatest threat that this country has faced since World War II. It's our greatest challenge. Every generation has a challenge. Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain. This generation's challenge is China's intent to replace the United States as the world superpower.
Not just to replace the United States as the world superpower, but to dominate the world, period. That's why they're building naval bases out of islands they make in the South Pacific and a whole host of other things. John Ratcliffe is right. China is an existential threat to the United States.
And we're all hoping that Joe Biden is going to listen to that, because he has always had very close ties to China. This was something we heard during the campaign several times. Be careful with Joe Biden's ties to China. We'll be right back here on America's Voice Live. Welcome back to America's Voice Live. I'm very excited about my next guest because he has information that you probably aren't hearing anyplace else, but it's very good news for the Republican Party. Paris Denard, welcome back to the program. He is the RNC Senior Communications Advisor for Black Media Affairs. Paris, this is incredible news that we're really not hearing about. There have been so many people that have been disappointed in the presidential election results that we're not looking at the results as a whole, but President Trump actually expanded the Republican Party, didn't he?
Thanks for having me on the program today. Absolutely. President Trump increased his support from Black Americans, receiving the highest share of minority voters since 1960. And so when you look at the progress that he was able to make, let's go back to 2016 when the pundits and the politicians and pollsters said he would get 0% of the Black vote, and he ended up getting 8%. Fast forward to 2020, President Trump received 12% of the Black vote, 13% of the Black vote in 2016 for Black men. And 2020, this year, he got 19%. And impressively, in 2016, he got 4% of Black women's vote, but in 2020, he got 9%. And so on every type of metrics that we can look at, the president did well in terms of increasing his support amongst Black men, amongst Black women, and that is what we wanted to do when we set out to form Black Voices for Trump. And when this RNC, under the chairmanship of Ronna McDaniel, put unprecedented resources, time, and energy into a serious, direct, multi-million-dollar engagement effort in the Black community. President Trump's policies, with the resource of the RNC and the campaign, showed that when you have a plan, when you have policies that work, and the will to make it happen and engage, you can make a difference.
But how could you do that in this cycle where it was so hard to get the message out? Tell us a little bit about what the grassroots program was like, because the mainstream media certainly was not going to help you with this.
No, you're absolutely right, Tudor. This was not going to be an effort that was going to be won by the mainstream media. We had to go right to where the people were, right to where they were listening. And so we had ads that ran in Black newspapers across the country. And we played ads on Black radio stations because Ronna McDaniel, our chairwoman, said, Paris, I want to be sure to take the party everywhere Black voters are watching, listening, and reading. So they may be watching America's Voice. Real America's Voice. They may be watching other networks. They may be reading the mainstream major papers, but they are going to be reading Black newspapers as well. They'll be listening to other type of programs. So wherever you get the invitation and wherever you think we should go, let's go. And that's what we did. So ads was one thing. Engaging with Black media was another thing. But most importantly, we were on the ground. We were on the ground in Black communities through our Black Voices for Trump community centers, which we invested in. Over 15 across the country in major Black cities. We were there safely door knocking, holding events, and doing trainings and encouraging people to know what President Trump has done and what he was going to do for a second term through his Platinum Plan. And it worked. You have to be on the ground. You have to engage, and you have to go to where people are and what they're consuming.
Absolutely. Paris, thank you so much for coming on. I have one quick question that I really want to get from you is, do you think that these voter fraud allegations have any legs? Just a yes or no?
Absolutely.
We're gonna figure it out. I know that. Paris Denard, you work so hard. Thank you so much. He is the RNC Senior Communications Advisor for Black Media Affairs. I want to bring Steve back in because we have a story out of Project Veritas. You know that they have been listening in on these CNN phone calls. Of course, CNN has a strange take on the Cuban community, don't they, Steve?
I have a strange take on just about everything. James O'Keefe and Project Veritas have been listening in, if you will, on the phone call for weeks now. That phone call has now been interrupted because at one point here recently, James O'Keefe said, Mr. Zucker, Jeff Zucker, James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, can we talk for a second? We've been listening for weeks. I think at that point, Jeff Zucker had a very bad day, maybe some heartburn, because there is so much material here And James O'Keefe had to decide before the election, would they expose this before the election or hang on and see what was said after the election, which is what they did. We've heard them targeting Lindsey Graham. We've heard them targeting others. And now we've heard Senior Vice President Cynthia Hudson vilifying Cubans for voting for Donald Trump. You have to hear it to believe it. Here's CNN on the inside.
The communism, socialism rhetoric as part of his hook for the Cubans in Miami, how that has resonated and how the Biden team has not done enough to counter that. This is all that the only reason they are supporting Trump is because of that narrative. And that narrative and the fact that, sadly, I have to say, there's a population that is very attracted to bullies, and no one is countering it properly in Florida. The Cubans are going to vote for Trump, and that's terrifying.
Attracted to bullies. No, Cynthia, the fact of the matter is they're repulsed by bullies and socialism because many of these folks are refugees or their parents were. They know the horrors of socialism in Cuba. They fled for a reason. They became Americans for a reason. And this Freedom Force, with these Cuban-American members of Congress now, I'm excited to see what they have to say to the likes of AOC and Rashida Tlaib and the whole squad. It's going to be a very interesting 2021, I can guarantee you that.
I find it very interesting that you have people behind the scenes at CNN saying that these folks are attracted to bullies when they are building up these people who are rioting and destroying businesses and setting fires to small business and saying, yes, this should continue to happen. This is a good thing. I can think of no worse manner of bullying than burning down someone's business. That's where we are today. Stay tuned. We've got more. Welcome back to America's Voice Live. Steve, I think that Joe Biden has come out recently and he's been saying some funny stuff. Is he a comedian? He is.
He's a cut up. Yeah. After grabbing the dog by the tail and getting a broken foot, man, he is. Well, maybe he's feeling no pain and he just thinks he's a funny guy. Here's what he said when it came to disagreements with Kamala Harris. How would you handle that, Joe? What would be the outcome? Strange answer. Here you go.
If I reach something where there's a fundamental disagreement we have based on a moral principle, I'll develop some disease and say I have to resign.
Really? Some would wonder if that hasn't already happened. Just saying. Tudor?
To me, this is very upsetting because he says if I have a moral problem. So for voters out there, he picked Kamala Harris and that was his choice. That wasn't your choice. But if there's a moral issue with the president that you chose, he's going to back off and allow Kamala Harris to have her way. It's very hard for me to understand, but he's also going to ask a special question of all of you out there. I want you to hear what he had to say about masks.
Where the federal government has authority, I'm going to issue a standing order that in federal buildings you have to be masked, and in transportation, interstate transportation, you must be masked, in airplanes and buses, etc. And so it's a matter of, and I think my inclination, Jake, is on the first day I'm inaugurated to say I'm going to ask the public for 100 days to mask. Just 100 days to mask. Not forever, 100 days. And I think we'll see a significant reduction if we occur that, if that occurs with vaccinations and masking, to drive down the numbers considerably.
Just so we're clear, when a politician says he's going to ask you for something, that doesn't mean he's going to ask. And when he comes out and he says he's going to have a federal mandate for all buses, all airlines, all transportation, when you start talking about federal mandates, Steve, is that really allowed? Can the federal government control the transportation systems in states?
Well, some would argue no, but we're in a strange place in 2020. I'd like to have Joe Biden hermetically sealed. Can we do that for everybody's benefit? Just hermetically sealed. And then, of course, he won't come out of the basement of the White House. Meanwhile, Anthony Fauci says, he didn't really mean 100 days. I think I just heard him say 100 days at least 3 times, maybe 4. 100 days with a mask. But Anthony Fauci, who's apparently going to be staying on, lucky us, is saying that's not what he meant. Listen.
No, he didn't mean it that way. I spoke to him about that. What he wants, he just wants to get, and it's a good idea, uniform. He's saying, hey, folks, trust me, everybody for 100 days. Now, it might be that after that, we still are going to need it, but he just wants it, everybody for a commitment for 100 days. And I discussed that with him, and I told him I thought that was a good idea.
He also said when he spoke to you, he asked you to continue in your role, which you've had under 6 presidents, but also to serve as his chief medical advisor. Will you do that? Did you say yes?
Oh, absolutely. I said yes right on the spot. Yeah.
Now, of course he did. Books to write, money to make, all of that glee and joy. By the way, Tudor, you've been out of the store lately. Does everybody wear a mask where you go? Because I've been to the store, pretty much everybody wears masks. It's been that way since July where I live. It's been mandated. Doesn't seem to be doing much of a job in stopping the spread of the virus, but maybe I'm just a cynic.
Well, that's a very good point because I wear a mask. Everybody in our area is required to wear a mask. Now, I know we asked our audience this question a few weeks ago, and a lot of people said in my town we don't wear masks, but those are also towns that don't seem to be hot spots. Now, where I am right now, a hot spot for COVID. Where you are, I believe you are also in a hot spot for COVID, and we have all been wearing masks for months. Now we are completely locked down. Really quickly, before we have to go to commercial, I want to tell you that Pfizer has had a bit of a setback in their supply. They had to cut in half their supply chain because they're saying that they expect to ship out these only half doses or only half of the doses they were expecting because they had a problem with their supply chain. Some of the ingredients failed to meet the standards that they needed, and they won't be able to ship out as many as they thought. But we do have other vaccines in the works, so that should help. We'll be right back. Welcome back to America's Voice Live. Steve, you finally got your wish. It's Friday.
It is Friday. But I'm still fascinated by what went on in Georgia, because I found the testimony yesterday to be riveting in many ways. The video that was rolled out of the suitcases being pulled from under the table. But then a gentleman went through the whole list, and we're going to give you a partial list because the list was longer than this. Who actually voted in Georgia? Where did those votes come from? The ones that they know about, that they say, wait a second, this could be a problem. Listen to this.
4,926 individuals voted in Georgia who had registered to vote after their Georgia voter registration date, thereby canceling their Georgia voter registration. 10,315 or more individuals to vote who are deceased by the time of the election. 395 individuals to vote in Georgia who had cast ballots in another state, which is illegal in both states. 15,700 individuals to vote in Georgia who had filed a national change of address with the United States Postal Service prior to November 3rd, 2020. 40,279 individuals to vote who had moved across county lines at least 30 days prior to Election Day and who had failed to properly re-register to vote in their new county after moving, also in violation of Georgia law.
Let me see there and carry the one. That's a lot of people. That's a lot, right there on my hand. That's a lot of people, Tudor, that voted having left the state, moved out of the state, died. Don't worry about that. Their vote still, they still had intent. And that was just a partial list of questionable ballots in just Georgia. And that goes on a lot of the challenges all over the country, as you well know.
Think about how key this is to figure out right now, though, because Georgia is going to be the deciding state for the Senate. We know there's another big election coming up in just a month's time. They have to figure out what happened there. People are obviously very anxious to know. Louis Gohmert, he's fired up, though. He had some strong words and a dark prediction for Durham and Barr if they don't, quote, clean up this mess and do their jobs. Take a listen.
Durham and Barr will deserve a big notation in history when it's written of the rise and fall of the United States if they don't clean up this mess, clean up the fraud, do your jobs, and save this little experiment in self-government. That's our challenge to the people at the top of the Justice Department.
This will go down in history if they let the country fall. It's strong words, but he's not wrong, Steve.
Well, he's fired up and he's blunt and he's to the point. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, cancel everything. That's the edict from the mayor. Mayor Garcetti says cancel everything. There'll be no Christmas here. Who the heck do you think you are anyway? He says you need to remain indoors, no travel, non-essential businesses have to be closed down. It's time to cancel everything as the coronavirus is ticking up and surging in numbers. Here's what he had to say.
My message couldn't be simpler. It's time to hunker down. It's time to cancel everything. And if it isn't essential, don't do it. Don't meet up with others outside your household. Don't host a gathering. Don't attend a gathering. And following our targeted safer at home order, if you're able to stay home, stay home.
Don't think you're free. You're in Los Angeles. I'll tell you what you'll do and what you're allowed to do. And if you do any of those things that I don't like, I'll turn off the power and the water, because that's another one of their tricks up the sleeves. Mayor Garcetti good at playing the heavy when it comes to enforcing these edicts from government and making sure that the citizens comply. We'll show those peasants as we fly off to the French Laundry. We'll show them who's in charge. This is why people are pushing back, Tudor. This is why.
This is just the first city in California to do this. The governor came out yesterday as well, and he said, hey, listen, I have a lockdown plan. We'll lock down pretty much everything that's happening in LA right now. We'll lock down everything except for essential grocery stores, laundromats, things like that. Everything else will be locked down in counties that I declare are having a rise. And so that opportunity is there for him, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, for him to go through any county in California and just shut them down whenever he decides. Now, this has been a common theme that places have been shutting down here and there, and we've had these government officials coming out and saying, stay at home, please stay at home. Well, you may remember the Austin mayor who came out and said, please stay at home. It's really important you don't travel, you don't go anywhere. The problem was that he happened to be vacationing in Cabo. So now he's come out and he said, listen, I made a mistake. This was a problem. You don't understand. Everybody gets it that we've had a lot of things that have been canceled. We haven't been able to do a lot of stuff. And poor us, we also had a cancellation, but then we just made it smaller and went on vacation. I don't think this is a great apology. You listen and tell me what you think.
Now, I've been in the news today. The first week of November, my daughter got married here in Austin. And like many other brides, she had to cancel her original plans in order to follow the rules. And instead, she had a small, mostly family, very private wedding. Sarah was beautiful. The wedding was beautiful and intimate. And most importantly, she was happy. Afterwards, a small, mostly family group traveled to Mexico. I want you to know that I regret that travel. I wouldn't travel now. I didn't over Thanksgiving, and I won't over Christmas.
First of all, I would say that Steve has a little bit of a problem understanding boundaries because he doesn't understand that he's not supposed to leave his house, but he also doesn't understand that you don't go on your daughter's honeymoon with her. What was that? That was weird.
Oh, you know, honey, I just want to tag along. Yeah, that's on the creepy list. I see back to my hand. Creepy number 1, 2. At any rate, the point is this. These politicians, one after another, have come out and said, don't do this. Then we find out they're doing exactly that. They come out with ridiculous lockdowns. They go to the French Laundry. They go to Cabo and hang out with Sammy Hagar or whatever it is they do in Cabo, drink tequila and dance with their daughter. Weird. But enough. Make it stop. If you're going to have an edict, lead by example. If you truly believe that this virus is going to be the death of us all, and you believe that people shouldn't go anywhere, then don't go anywhere yourself. Lead by example. Is that so hard to figure out? Apparently, it's incredibly hard to figure out for these folks. Meanwhile, you've got some folks that are saying, we don't care if you stay home or not, because it's not really your home, it's ours, and we're going to live there. They're called Moorish sovereign citizens. They're kind of an unusual bunch. They operate in Oregon and Washington. This group around Edmonds, Washington, they're knocking on people's doors and saying, you know what? Get out. This is my house. And they're like, excuse me? Get out. This is our house. They're really doing this. They believe that they have legal ownership. These are the kind of people that don't buy license plates or pay taxes or go to court unless they're handcuffed and forced to do so, because they believe they're sovereign citizens and therefore they can take whatever they want. Sounds a lot like the folks that are trying to take power in this country. Does that sound cynical? It's not really. It's just kind of an observation. At any rate, greatly appreciate you being here. It is Friday. It's good to have you along for the conversation here on America's Voice Live. Still to come today, the parlor question, because Tudor puts it out there every day now. The parlor question coming up. You don't want to miss that. It's always a fiery conversation here on America's Voice Live. Thank you for making America's Voice Live part of your daily activities. We appreciate you being here, especially on a Friday. Thank you so much.
Yes, Steve, in Michigan here, we've had some interesting memes go around with the big Gretch being the Grinch. They've kind of made her face green. She's shutting down everything. Well, in D.C., apparently, it's not too different. Only Mitch is the Grinch there. They had a Mitch the Grinch protest before the Trump Christmas tree lighting. Take a look at this.
Issues. But we have the opportunity to bring joy and laughter as we demand that Congress approve a stimulus plan for all, specifically a COVID-19 stimulus package that addresses millions of residents who have immediate needs that have been ignored by this administration.
This is rough. This is just a few days after he ended up with body bags on his front porch. They're really going after him.
Very nice. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., the most critical things facing members of Congress are apparently smoking the ganj and riding the tiger. I can't make this up, Tudor. It's the Christmas season. These are things that you do around Christmas, apparently, if you're in Congress. Nick Ballots is here from Just the News to tell us about sparking it up and then dealing with big cats, I guess. Nick, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. So what do you make of that? How do tigers and weed become the most important pressing issues in 2020?
Good question. I was on Capitol Hill yesterday speaking with members, and Republicans were not happy that the Democratic leadership in the House were moving forward with this decriminalization bill for marijuana, as well as this public safety bill regarding large cats, the ownership and public contact of large cats like tigers. Those are the bills that actually passed today in the House, and we still don't know what's happening with stimulus funding for coronavirus, which is being negotiated still. There are several proposals floating around. We'll see what happens on that front, but there are members, at least on the Republican side in the House, who aren't happy that that was the focus today when stimulus is still outstanding.
Well, we've heard some different stories. We've heard that the Democrats think that there is a pretty strong possibility of the $908 billion bill passing, but then we've heard that Republicans want a $500 billion bill. So do you have any scuttlebutt on what the truth is there?
So I was speaking with members of the House Problem Solvers Caucus, and they're telling me that the $908 billion package that was negotiated between their caucus and members of the U.S. Senate, a bipartisan group, is one that looks most likely to pass. The framework that would actually pass in formal language would probably reflect that framework that they've put out. Now, the signal for that bill actually coming to fruition was when Pelosi and Schumer said it would be a good starting point. But based on my conversations with the members in that coalition who put that bipartisan proposal together, they think it's really the end point. The way they see it, that's as much as you're going to get right now in this Congress, in the lame duck session, with President Trump in office, the $908 billion, which does not include direct payments, direct stimulus payments. And I asked them why wasn't it included, and they said, look, we didn't have consensus on that. We're doing the $908 billion, and the main one of the main pieces of that is the Paycheck Protection Program.
Yeah, Nick, the other thing that's been in the headlines that I've noticed is Senator Jim Inhofe has decided to not go after Rule 320. I'm going to refer to it as the big tech rule, if you will, that would take away some of the protections from Twitter and Facebook that the president's very focused on. So the Defense Authorization Act is probably going to be rejected. And the fact that in there it also says that bases and monuments could also be targeted for change or possibly for removal. The president says this is not what America wants. I happen to think he's right about that. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely setting up an interesting showdown that could happen here with this bill, because if Trump holds to his position that he's not going to sign that defense authorization because of Section 230, what are lawmakers going to do? That's the question. And I think Inhofe's trying to figure out how to navigate that issue. The Republicans in the Senate are trying to figure it out. We'll see if the president continues to hold that position. This Section 230 could be something that lawmakers address separately, but they would be running out of time because, the new administration, the transition is underway. So it's something we're following at Just the News, and we'll see how it unfolds.
Excellent. Nicholas Ballots, thank you so much. Check out all of his work at justthenews.com. We appreciate you coming on. Steve, I want to talk to you about AOC because she calls herself a democratic socialist, but she seems to be capitalizing on her position as a lawmaker. So she has her own website. I'm not sure if you knew this. She has her own website. I didn't even know that you could have your own store about your socialist messaging, but she does, and she has a sweatshirt. I want you to see this sweatshirt. It says, "Tax the Rich." I'm not sure if you can see the price there. It's $60. So once you actually check out, this is a $65 sweatshirt. Who's gonna buy it though? Because it's really expensive. She has other shirts though, Steve. You could get some of your favorite slogans: abolish ICE, drink water, and don't be racist. And then of course the tax the rich there for a rich $65. Who buys those?
She's cashing in, is what you're telling me, on the free enterprise nature of America, entrepreneurial spirit, which I respect. I think I'm good with that, except that it's completely contradictory to everything that she says and apparently stands for. Tax the rich with a $65 sweatshirt. I think you're taxing the mathematically impaired by selling a sweatshirt for $65 that I can probably buy for half that price at a dozen different outlets. But hey, I'm just a guy working. America's Voice Live will be back after this. Tudor, I've decided that maybe I'm going to pull the James O'Keefe right here, my own personal Project Veritas. I'm going to run tape on what goes on during the commercials. All right? I'm going to run tape on that and then share it with the world, because it'll be very entertaining. They'll love it. Anyhow, welcome back to America's Voice Live on a Friday.
Well, this is my version of my Project Veritas, because you know that I am incredibly fired up about what the teachers union in East Lansing posted on their Facebook page today. So I just wanted to take you a little bit back in time, because a few years back, I was under the wrong impression that the teachers union cared about my children. You have to remember, it's called the Teachers Union. So this is the National Education Association's general counsel back in 2009. Listen to what he had to say.
NEA and its affiliates are such effective advocates. Despite what some among us would like to believe, it is not because of our creative ideas. It is not because of the merit of our positions. It is not because we care about children, and it is not because we have a vision of a great public school for every child. NEA and its affiliates are effective advocates because we have power. And we have power because there are more than 3.2 million people who are willing to pay us hundreds of millions of dollars in dues each year because they believe that we are the unions that can most effectively represent them, the unions that can protect their rights and advance their interests as education employees.
Not for the children. Not for the children. It's because they have power, because they have so much money, and they take care of those people. They do not take care of your children, and that was proven once again today when East Lansing Education Association posted this on their Facebook page saying parents need to give up the fantasy that their kids making incredible academic progress this year is more important than people not dying. This is opportunity hoarding and a vision that your own kid deserves to excel academically right now more than others deserve to live, have housing, eat. It's immoral and ignores the fact that we live in community with others. So parents, if you want your kids to be in school, you are immoral. I asked people on social media today, I said this post, and this is true. Yesterday, or 2 days ago, a child in California, an 11-year-old boy, committed suicide on his school Zoom call. We know that children's depression rates have skyrocketed during this pandemic. I asked people, what do you think about big education shaming parents and the impact of 2020? This is what you all had to say about this. We have Carol Ray here. Steve, I'll give this one to you.
Yeah, it's shocking what you've gone through there, Tudor. I just have to say that. It's appalling. Let me answer the question. What the hell is wrong with these people? We'll go with Carol Ray. I have 7 grandchildren from 6th grade to 12th. One in his first year of high school is failing. One who is supposed to graduate in 21 is failing. The others are struggling. This is ridiculous. And now Governor Newsom has put us under a hard lockdown. No unnecessary walking. These kids need fresh air, exercise, and interaction with other kids. Wake up, America. I could not agree more with those sentiments.
Yeah, you can't walk now in California. That's actually a thing. The Mudge says that is a truly sickening statement made by the school district. I think they forget that we as taxpayers fund this education and that they report to us. Further evidence of why private and patriarchal schools are really the only choice for a true and balanced education and not indoctrination. Had enough? Run for a seat on your school board and change it. Steve, that's something you say all the time.
It is what I say all the time. Don't forget about your school board elections. They're very important. The school situation has exposed what we already knew, says President-elect Paul Heinzinger. The teachers' unions and administrators don't care about the children. They want the money, just like the soundbite we just played. COVID is going to have long-term consequences for the big education scam. Parents are being forced to see what garbage the kids are being taught. The system doesn't care. Great question today, Tudor. Well done, and thank you for joining us here on America's Voice Live. We'll have more of that still to come.
This is the second hour of America's Voice Live. It is Friday, your favorite day of the week, Steve. It's December 4th, 2020. I'm Tudor Dixon here with Steve Gruber as usual. Steve, we've got a lot of stories today, don't we?
You know, we've got a lot of big stories. We broke a big story here on the program yesterday. If you missed it, that Georgia videotape story we broke right here as it was happening live. Now we have the tapes. We'll share more of that stunning video here in just a moment.
And Joe Biden says he will reinstate transgender bathroom rules on day one. We'll have Moms for America's Kimberly Fletcher here to react.
And the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, has a strong warning for Joe Biden. The big question is, will he listen?
Yes, first, let's get to that video in Georgia, though. It was presented at yesterday's hearing, which was held by Georgia's Senate Judiciary Subcommittee. This is pretty shocking evidence. Now, these folks didn't understand that they were being recorded because they were inside of the arena. They didn't know that these cameras existed. That is why we have not seen this footage up until this point. So this is new to everyone yesterday. No one had seen it, despite what some of the people on the floor were saying. Oh, we knew about this. No one knew about this. So what you're about to see in this video is that after everybody gets told they're leaving for the night, we're stopping the count. We're no longer counting any more ballots. You're going to leave. They watch all the Republican watchers leave. The media leaves. Everybody leaves the room. 6 people are left over. And when you watch this tape, you'll be shocked to see they pull ballots out from a table that's been sitting there all day long. And even though they've said they're going to stop counting, they start processing these ballots. Take a look.
Pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids at about 8:22 a.m. in the morning. So she put that table there. So the same person who's staying behind now, the same person who cleared the place out under the pretense that we're going to stop counting, is the person who put the table there at 8:22 in the morning. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table. Yeah, upper right hand, you see the gentleman in the red. So he just pulled one out.
4 suitcases. They're estimating that each suitcase could have held 6,000 ballots. Those machines process 3,000 ballots an hour. They ended up running ballots for 2.5 hours. You can do the math there. It's enough to swing this election the other direction. So the question is, where did these ballots come from? Who put the ballots there? Now it's 14.5 hours of tape. They haven't gone through the whole 14.5 hours to see when these suitcases were rolled in because they just got the tape yesterday, but they will. Now, again, I want to reiterate, they just got the tape yesterday. It was just found out, hey, there was some strange anomaly here. People came back at 1 o'clock in the morning, saw that there were folks still there. There's security footage. Let's get that. But this is what Facebook had to say about this when this was posted last night on Facebook. No one knows exactly what's going on with this video, but Facebook immediately says this is false information. And if you click through to find out why it's false information, they say it's been debunked, that is not inappropriate, that this was normal ballot counting. Steve, there's nobody that can assure you that this is normal ballot counting at this point.
In fact, I can assure you under Georgia law, it is required that Republicans are there. It's required that the public has access. That's both required under Georgia law. Neither of those provisions were met. Therefore, on its face, it was not legal to do what they were doing. What was going on? I can't tell you. Neither can Facebook, and that's part of your problem. Meanwhile, Governor Brian Kemp, under a lot of pressure from Republicans, not just in Georgia, but all over the country, who are angry with him and his Secretary of State, he finally came out last night and said, listen, let's do a signature audit of ballots. It's time we do a signature audit of ballots and get to the bottom of who voted, who didn't, where did the ballots come from. I'd say it's about time. Listen.
Senator Loeffler, you're not called early on for a signature audit. Obviously, the Secretary of State, per the laws and the Constitution, would have to order that. He has not done that. I think it should be done. I think, especially with what we saw today, it raises more questions. There needs to be transparency on that. I would again call for that, and I think in the next 24 hours, hopefully we'll see a lot more from the hearings that the legislature had today, and we'll be able to look and see what the next steps are.
What's not in question is the fact that Georgia, Fulton County and other counties, Cobb County, DeKalb County, the big counties around Atlanta, they need to clean up their act. There's a lot of questions about whether or not the votes were counted properly, if it was a fair election. And, of course, you've got the 2 Senate races coming up on January 5th. People watching very closely as to what will happen at that time.
Yes, and a surprising report from the Wall Street Journal. Pfizer now expects to ship out only half of the COVID-19 vaccine doses that they had initially planned for it. They're saying that they had supply chain problems. They didn't provide further details about it, but one of the sources for the Wall Street Journal told them that they had ingredients that failed to meet the standards in the early on manufacturing process. Steve, you just have to wonder where these are coming from and if all of these pharmaceutical companies are being very careful of what countries they're working with to get this, because we just heard yesterday about all of the criminal activity surrounding these vaccines.
Now, one of the critical things is that we have learned in 2020 throughout the pandemic are supply chain issues. Certainly when it comes to medications, and the vaccine is no exception. We, as America, we need to step up and protect our supply chains when it comes to critical medications. Again, nothing more critical than the vaccines. Now, here's a pop quiz for you. It's Friday. I know you didn't want a pop quiz on a Friday, but here it is anyway. I want you to count. How many times do you hear Joe Biden say 100 days of masks? He says that's what he's going to do on day one, is ask for you and all of Americans for 100 days of masks. Every time he says that, I want you to count. We'll do a little check at the end. Listen in.
Where the federal government has authority, I'm going to issue a standing order that in federal buildings you have to be masked, and in transportation, interstate transportation, you must be masked in airplanes and buses, et cetera. And so it's a matter of, and I think my inclination, Jake, is on the first day I'm inaugurated to say I'm going to ask the public for 100 days to mask. Just 100 days to mask. Not forever, 100 days. And I think we'll see a significant reduction if we occur that, if that occurs with vaccinations and masking, to drive down the numbers considerably.
All right, so he said mask 6 times by my count, and 100 days of masks 3 times by my count. But Tudor, apparently that's not what it means.
No, Dr. Fauci says that's not what it means. Listen to this.
No, he didn't mean it that way. I spoke to him about that. What he wants, he just wants to get, and it's a good idea, uniform. He's saying, hey, folks, trust me, everybody for 100 days. Now, it might be that after that, we still are going to need it, but he just wants it, everybody for a commitment for 100 days. And I discussed that with him, and I told him I thought that was a good idea.
He also said when he spoke to you, he asked you to continue in your role, which you've had under 6 presidents, but also to serve as his chief medical advisor. Will you do that? Did you say yes?
Oh, absolutely. I said yes right on the spot. Yeah.
So, Steve, the question that I have here is, what is different now that coming out? What is asking the public for 100 days of masking? What is that going to change? And should we be concerned that this is a mandate? They've told us there would not be mandates. It sounds like there's a mandate coming.
Mandate. Well, here's the concern. You look across this country, whether it's California or New York, where they're arresting, people that own restaurants for not complying with the orders, or Michigan, or wherever. Masks are being worn pretty much across the country already. The virus is still spreading like wildfire. What's it really doing? Not much. America's Voice Live will continue.
Welcome back to America's Voice Live. One country that has been in the news quite a bit lately is Iran. And that's because there have been, we just recently heard about their nuclear scientist who was assassinated, but also they've been calling out to Joe Biden. And they've said, if you want to make a deal with us, you're going back to the old deal, and it's going to be you bowing down to us. This is something they were used to with the Obama administration, not with the Trump administration. But my next guest, he has a very close understanding of what it's like to deal with the Iranian regime. Ali Reza Jaffazadeh, I want to bring him in. He is the Deputy Director of the Washington office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Welcome to the program. We were just talking in the break about what is going on with this trial, because the regime, is it the regime that is on trial right now for attacking your summit that had people from around the world, really, in France?
Exactly. You know, the top Iranian regime diplomat, so-called diplomat, but in fact a terrorist, who was stationed in their embassy in Vienna, was in charge of a massive, well-calculated, well-orchestrated terror plot to detonate a very powerful explosive during a mass rally of about 100,000 people in June of 2018, where the opposition leader, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, who is a prime target by the Iranian regime, was speaking there. There were also other dignitaries from all over Europe, and also in the United States, from Newt Gingrich to Mayor Giuliani to Governor Bill Richardson, and a whole host of others. And they were caught just hours before they managed to detonate the bomb, with the bomb and all the other culprits. And for the first time in the history, a sitting so-called diplomat is now on trial in Europe for terrorism charges. And the Iran regime, everyone knows, has been engaged in terrorism for years and years, but they always got away with it. They always said it wasn't us, it was such and such proxy. We had little influence over them, and they always denied it. In this case, they can't deny it because the diplomat was caught with a bomb, with the culprits. Everything is on tape, and everybody has already confessed, and they have all the details. That's why I think this is a very significant trial, that the whole regime actually is on trial, as you said, because no one can carry out such an operation without the full endorsement of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and the President Hassan Rouhani, and also the embassies that have to facilitate that. That's Jawad Zarif, the foreign minister, and the intelligence minister, who is Mahmoud Alawi. So that pretty much sums up who was involved.
And this really goes to the nature of the Iranian regime. We had John Durham just come out a couple of days ago and say, hey, you know what, we don't want any international assassinations. This is not how this is going to go. But I want to reiterate the fact that at these summits, it's not just a small gathering of a few people. I was at your summit a few years ago. This is thousands of people in a room, and many diplomats from across the globe that come together to speak about the freedom of Iran and how important freeing this country is from this regime. And they were willing to come and take all of those people out. Tell us a little bit about, a little of your insight about what you know about the Iranian regime and just how dangerous they are.
Well, the Iran regime remains to be as dangerous as they have been, but what is different now is that they're extremely vulnerable. One of the main reasons that they took such a high risk of carrying out this bold terror plot in the heart of Europe was they were so desperate to take out the opposition leader, take out this movement, because they were making a lot of inroads, they're making a lot of advancements inside Iran. There were several rounds of major protests in Iran right before this terror plot in about 200 cities across the country, and that has actually continued. So on the one hand, you see a desperate regime who is getting weaker and weaker every day. It's rejected by its own population. It is even getting weaker in the region. A lot of those Muslim and Arab nations who were either in cahoots with the Ayatollahs or were too afraid to speak up against them are now standing up, and they're distancing themselves from the Iranian regime. A lot of Shiite population in Iraq, in Lebanon, and other places, they're rejecting the Ayatollahs. They don't want to have anything to do with them. That's why it's very, very important to understand that when you talk about diplomacy, well, diplomacy is a great thing to do, but you want to make sure that the other party does speak that language. As far as the Iran regime is concerned, diplomacy means hostage-taking, blackmail, terrorism, and then negotiate over that to get some more concessions out of it, and you don't want to go that route.
Really quick, we have about 30 seconds left. A year ago, you had massive protests there. Young people were really at the point where they were close to getting in and actually hurting the Iranian regime in a way they'd never been hurt before. What is the financial situation for this regime? Because it seemed as though there was some fear there that the people would actually overthrow the regime. But are they financially able to push the people back? Really quick.
Well, the anger of the population is still there, even though the pandemic has tried to, cover that. But the deep-rooted disagreement of the people against the regime is there. There is an organized opposition. 80% of the Iranian people live below the poverty line because the mullahs are manipulating everything in their hands. So the revolution is coming. The prospect for change is there like before. All we need to do is build up more pressure on the Ayatollahs and don't let them get away with murder inside Iran or terrorism outside of Iran.
Ali Reza Jafazadeh, we follow you closely. Thank you so much for coming on. He is the Deputy Director of the Washington office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, a very important group with a lot of power and a leader who I highly respect. Madam Rajavi is an incredible woman. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to America's Voice Live. Steve, it's like the slow crawl to Christmas. We're getting almost there. It's been the longest year of my life.
Yeah, I love Christmas shopping. Not really,
Sure.
but it is 20 shopping days until Christmas. It's beginning to feel that way. Our own Jessica Rivera in our Denver newsroom. She has a spirited Christmas story for us. Jessica, welcome to it.
Thank you, Tudor and Steve. Well, Christmas Day is exactly 3 weeks away from today, and this year's Santa visits during a pandemic will definitely look different if they happen at all in some areas. But for in-person Santa visits, Santa's elves will be taking temperatures this year. Santa will be wearing what is called a Santa shield, which is obviously to protect kids from COVID-19, but also we have to remember it's to protect Santa himself, since he is up in age and is in the vulnerable population. This year, Santa may also choose to visit kids outside if it's not too cold, hopefully. But another way Santa is making sure he can see everyone is virtual visits or messages. Visiting Santa online or receiving a personal message from Santa is also a great and new popular way parents are making sure the kiddos get to see Santa this year, especially for kids who are immunocompromised or if Santa just can't make it to your mall or area this year. And really, this may just be more popular even after the pandemic because there's no waiting in these long lines, and now Santa has officially become computer savvy. But of course, parents will still want pictures with Santa, so until then, Santa had to adapt to this year, 2020, just like the rest of the world has had to do. And Tudor and Steve, my little guy actually received his message from Santa last night. Here's a quick look at that.
Hello, Giovanni. It's me, Santa. How are you doing? Are you doing well? Oh, yes.
And I'm going to be honest, he was a little scared when Santa said his name, surprisingly, but he is 3, and so I guess it's to be expected. But my niece, who is a bit older than him, absolutely loved it, and I think her parents thought it was probably her best visit from Santa. So it's just another way, one of those things that parents, as all of us, we just have to see what works for our kids this year, but there are still plenty of options out there.
Yeah.
Well, we know that the president has talked quite a bit about Christmas in the past 5 years, really. We've heard him come out and talk for a year before he was president. Christmas is under attack. And then during his entire presidency, Christmas is no longer under attack. Well, Christmas may be under attack by some people. Take a look at this picture that was on Facebook today. You may have trouble seeing what it says or seeing what the picture is. That's because it may show violent or I can't even read that word, violent or something content. It's graphic content. That's what it was. It may show violent or graphic content. So beware. We're going to actually show you the picture. You might want to look away because it's obviously going to, oh, wait a minute. It's just Santa and the baby Jesus. So this is Christmas under attack, Steve. Santa and the baby Jesus might be violent or graphic content. How can that be?
This is why social media and Rule 230 need to come into play. Censoring Santa and the baby Jesus. I don't agree with that. America doesn't agree with that. Why would we put up with that? It's a beautiful picture. It's a great painting. I don't know who did it. I just think it's great, and I think it's cool, and I think that censoring it is, well, it's un-American, and it's certainly not very Christmassy, I'll tell you that. Meanwhile, in New York City, speaking of not being very Christmassy, New York City buses blocking the view of everybody to watch the Rockefeller tree get lit. Maybe these people need to get lit and relax. Just throwing it out there. Good Lord, why is everybody so tense? Have some eggnog, something. I bet they block it all off. I mean, just stop.
What I think is funny about this is they block it all off with these buses so people can't be near each other because, heaven forbid people be near each other outside with their masks on. Look at that crowd. Look at that. Did they really think that this was going to solve people being close together? So now, instead of having all the streets open where people could be all down the street, you're all smashed together. Stay tuned. Welcome back to America's Voice Live. You may remember a few years ago when President Obama was in office, he came out and told all of the schools across the nation that they had to allow children to use the restroom with which the gender they identified with connected. And that was a really big shock for a lot of young girls and boys across the country, especially high school aged girls had a significant problem with this because it was very hard for high schools to control what boys were going into the restroom, because here's the kicker. You weren't allowed to really ask any questions about it. And this really happened overnight. The president sent out this notice to all of the schools across the country and said, if you do not comply, Title IX funding gets pulled from your school. They had no choice and they had no preparation, and children and parents were shocked by this decision. Now the President Trump came in and he repealed this, but now Joe Biden has come out and said that this is a day one issue for him, and this is what Chuck Schumer had to say about it.
Joe Biden said that on his first day of office, he will give transgender students access to sports, bathrooms, and locker rooms in accordance with their gender identity in all federally funded schools. Do you think he has the ability to do this, and do you agree with this decision?
I agree with the decision, and I know he'll check things out thoroughly legally.
He agrees with the decision and he'll check things out legally. Now, before there was a bit of a workaround on this, I want to bring in Kimberly Fletcher. She is the founder of Moms for America. I think that she's probably hot on this issue as a mom. I know for me as a mom of 4 girls, this is a scary thought for them to go through this again. What's your reaction to this?
Well, the reaction is right now, moms haven't really realized that it's happening again. We thought that it was all taken care of. When the President of the United States came in, President Trump, one of the very first things that he did was overturn this. And I think what we did when this happened last time is help parents understand that the President of the United States has no legal authority to dictate to any school district, any county, any state, any city, what kind of bathrooms they're going to have. All he can do, he or she, is blackmail the schools and the states with our own money. If we're giving the money to the federal government to maintain what is constitutionally outlined that they're allowed to spend money on, and then we now have to, they're going to tell us, we're going to give you some of that money back, but only if you do these things. And that is something that is so far beyond the constitutional parameters of what the founding fathers set up. And mothers came out and were so upset and concerned and angry because their children were unsafe. There were little girls who were literally coming home and crying to their mother, saying they were afraid they were going to say the wrong pronoun, or that they may turn spontaneously into the opposite sex. It is creating chaos and confusion. And it has absolutely nothing to do with anything else except power, control, and creating that chaos and confusion within our children. And moms don't like it.
And Kimberly, I want to clarify one thing you said. When you said that the girls came home, that was because education came along with this. So it wasn't just that there was going to be this gender identity bathroom situation in the schools. It was also that the schools then taught these young children what gender identity was. And perhaps as a parent, you may want to be the person that is talking to your child about that yourself. But again, like I said, this happened overnight, and you're right. This is more of a blackmail, but the president had the authority to do this based on him working around this Title IX and saying, hey, these funds, they're not going to go to you unless you agree to this. Ultimately, the schools had to agree to this. It was mostly, the most impact was for high school, but what you're saying is that these were younger children, like elementary school age children that were getting this education. There are some little girls that are born and they think that they're boys, and there are some little boys that feel like they were actually girls. And so there was a lot of questioning among these young children saying, is that going to happen to me? Am I really not a girl?
Well, you know, when our children are young, they're looking for direction and guidance. They're looking for truth and clarity. And our children, my grandchildren, I watch them play, and one day they're helicopters and want to jump off of the couch. Are we going to let them just go willy-nilly, jumping off the couch, jumping off the roof. They're young, they're curious, they're figuring things out. And what they expect is parents and adults to give them that guidance and direction to help them navigate through life, to help them understand what truth and reality is. And truth and reality is that we're not doctor assigned, we're God designed. And they're making this about a transgender thing, but there's absolutely no such thing as a transgender bathroom or locker room. It is an open sex co-ed bathroom or locker room that is being forced on our children in an environment where we are mandated by the government to send our children. And we only can send them somewhere else if we have approval from the government. So we're putting our children and parents in a very difficult situation. If we don't send our children to those schools, they can take our children away from us, or they can put us in jail. And that's what we're faced with. So they're saying either you do what we say, or we're going to take your children away from you. And they're expecting parents to be okay with their children being put in that situation. And it's a whole entire curriculum. It's a whole entire culture that they're trying to push on our children in these school systems where we are mandated to send our children. So this isn't just about, when Target came out and decided that they were going to have an open sex bathroom, fine. We can decide that Target is no longer a safe place for moms to go and shop. But we can't decide that when it's a government mandated place where we have to send our children to get education. And that's the bottom line here. No one has the authority to dictate to parents that they have to put their children in an unsafe situation. And no law or government has the ability or authority to dictate to schools that they have to do that.
Those are all good points. Kimberly Fletcher, thank you so much for coming on. She is the founder of Moms for America. And what she's saying is she's talking about government overreach, really, folks. That's what she's talking about. And that's what we were thinking could happen if there was a Biden administration. And we're already hearing that day one, that is going to happen. Steve, I don't know if you've heard this story. The University of Chicago is defending one of their professors' free speech rights, which is something that we really haven't heard that much. But the university is pushing back against calls for the termination of Professor Dorian Abbott. He sparked controversy when he came out and he argued about the concept of hiring more women and minorities. The university came out and said they're trying to hire more women and minorities, and he said, hey, that's not. He came out on social media and said the faculty members should be hired on the basis of merit, and students just went bananas over this. Yes, it's crazy talk, and at least that's what they thought, yes. But the university president, he came out, and you'll like this. He came out and he said, we believe universities have an important role as places where novel and even controversial ideas can be proposed, tested, and debated. For this reason, the university does not limit the comments of faculty members.
Well, that's the way it should be. The point of being at a university is to have conversations, robust conversations, and if your argument's stronger than the next guy over, then you win the conversation. It's not supposed to be a vacuum. It's not supposed to be a place where you're taught what to think. It's supposed to be a place where you have rigorous academic debates back and forth, and you decide how to teach people that your ideas are better. Not that you get silenced because they don't like your ideas. That's not America. Rigorous academic discussion, that's how you make advancements in this world. That's how you discover vaccines. That's how you discover new ways of doing things and accomplishing big things, which America has always done. America has always done big things, but not by muzzling our fellow citizens. Point in fact, America's Voice Live continues after this. Beijing intends to dominate the planet, the rest of the planet economically, militarily, technologically. Many of China's major public initiatives and prominent companies offer only a layer of camouflage, and it's not very thick, to the activities of the Chinese Communist Party. So says John Ratcliffe. In fact, he says to the Biden folks, they are a real threat. They are the only threat that we should be concerned with right now for the most part. In fact, here's part of what he had to say.
What is your message on China to the Biden team?
They are our greatest adversary. We need to recognize China for the threat that they are. It's the greatest threat that this country has faced since World War II. It's our greatest challenge. Every generation has a challenge. Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, the Iron Curtain. This generation's challenge is China's intent to replace the United States as the world superpower.
Turn North America into a farm for the Chinese Communist Party. Make no mistake, that's part of the big plan. Adam Roosevelt joining me now, a Republican strategist and an expert on national and homeland security. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to be here this Friday. John Ratcliffe's comments, right or wrong?
I would say right, but I'd also say many of the statements regarding China being the biggest threat to national security, they always fail to address accountability of past administrations. We've heard this statement for generations that China is a threat. The question is, how did China become the number one threat to our national security? This is a great power competition. It's a race, and it's really a full contact sport. So we expect this from the Chinese government. But the question that I would ask is, how did the Chinese become the number one national security threat? And it's an interesting conversation to have as we look at historicals.
Well, I think we've been staring at smartphones and televisions and entertainment and football games and basketball games and, enjoying ourselves overall and not paying attention to the threats that surround us all over the world. It's a dangerous place, this thing we live in called the world. But I think we've been distracted by so many things we haven't paid attention, most Americans anyhow. What do you think of that?
I think you're absolutely right. And I will tell you that from an economic perspective, the world has benefited from the Chinese being a manufacturing and cheap labor powerhouse. Our goal now needs to be to transition away from this reliance on China and centered more on our trade relations, but being a manufacturing hub for our own country. So I think the dependence on China has been primarily because folks were trying to maximize profits for generations. And now we're in a situation where COVID-19 has reminded America that we don't have control of our supply chains. So this is just one element of the power struggle here between the United States and China and our reliance on the Chinese.
We don't even have control of pharmaceuticals. Antibiotics, for example, the last penicillin plant in America closed in 2004 after China bought up all the rest of the plants worldwide, crushed the price, and put that company out of business, leaving America vulnerable with antibiotics, the most basic health protective drug out there. What about Joe Biden and his cozy relationship with Biden? How concerned are you about that as you look at it?
I'll tell you this. I'm very concerned, but I've been concerned prior to Obama administration as well as the Biden administration because of how far the Chinese have come. In my world, I spent 9 years in the U.S. military working in counterinsurgency in the Middle East. I got a chance to really study the problems that are global and are threats to our national security. And I spent 4 years at the Department of Homeland Security working for the Intelligence and Analysis Division, boots on the ground inside, seeing what these threats really are, understanding how law enforcement has the tools and capabilities. But I'll say that there's a taxonomy of national security threats that are so wide-ranging in today's landscape. U.S. supply chain readiness here, strategic economic investments that the Chinese use to weaponize leverage. Experts, they remain experts in our backyard and how to win, even here in the United States. So I would say when or if Joe Biden decides to come in, provided this goes in the direction of Joe Biden, we're going to have a lot to talk about across a variety of different national security threats.
Well, I mentioned during the break when we were talking that I live in East Lansing, Michigan. Michigan State University, a major university. The number of foreign students and Chinese students by the thousands here. That's true all across America. The Chinese students have come in. Chinese have become welcomed here. And I wonder if that's put us at a disadvantage. I'm also curious, you made the comment you came, up for air, if you will, from underwater. What do you think China's role has been in disrupting America's elections? We have all these conflicts and questions about voting machines and electronics. I know that China's obviously deeply immersed in all of that. What do you make of it?
You know, I will tell you, back in 2016, we had we looked at these type of things, and I worked with the Department of Homeland Security. You may have seen the news. Director Christopher Krebs was fired, who made the statement that the elections were secure. I do find it interesting at the time of 2016 that the focus was cyber, whereas now the focus is integrity and fraud. I would say that cyber didn't play much of a role here, as per the Department of Homeland Security. We've had more issues here with our own citizens and being accountable and holding to the integrity that we as American citizens are due to hold to. So I don't think that the Chinese played a role in cyber. I do believe that they played a role in information warfare campaigns, which is always an asset and a tool they will leverage to gain a winning position.
Old-fashioned propaganda is what you're saying. Old-fashioned hammer us with the message, whether it's on social media or buying space on the Wall Street Journal. I'll give you 15 seconds for the last word.
Okay, well, I'll just say that PSYOPs is a well-coordinated campaign, and it requires folks to really understand the strategy. If America wants to get ahead, it has to think about the taxonomy of these threats and outpace our competitors.
Adam Roosevelt, great having you here. Great insight. Would love to have you back on the program and dig deeper because of your experience and your insight. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
There you have it, Adam Roosevelt. He's been there. He understands it. And he's warning you and I right here on America's Voice Live. been a terrific Friday. So glad you joined us here. And even though Tudor and I are heading for the finish line, a lot more straight ahead on Real America's Voice, Tudor.
Yeah, let's go out to our D.C. studios where we have David Brody waiting to tell us what's happening on the water cooler tonight. Tell us what's going on, David.
Hey, Stephen Tudor, David Brody here. On the water cooler later this afternoon, boy, we've got an interesting show. Congressman Michael Cloud joining us. He's a U.S. Congressman from Texas. He's going to talk about the House Freedom Caucus. He's part of it, and they are upset with Bill Barr. They want to know why in the world is Bill Barr not investigating more of this election voter fraud. So he'll have some comments on the water cooler this afternoon. And also Scott Rasmussen with Just the Polls will be along with us. He's got a lot of interesting breakdown as to where this country is going from an ideological standpoint. So I hope you join us today, 4 o'clock Eastern, here on Real America's Voice.
Thank you, David. That's awesome. It's going to be an awesome show. And like you said, 4 o'clock today. Tune in. Now I want to get to our social media question. This had me incredibly fired up this morning, which is why I had to ask people what they thought. Maybe I need to calm down, maybe not. Seems like a lot of people agreed with me. But this morning, we found this post from the East Lansing Education Association. So this is the teachers union saying parents need to give up the fantasy that their kids making incredible academic progress this year is more important than people not dying. This opportunity hoarding is a vision that your own kid deserves to excel academically right now more than others deserve to live, have housing, eat. It's immoral and ignores the fact that we live in community with others. So parents who want their children to go to school, we're immoral. We're also somehow taking housing from children and people. I'm not sure how that connects, but I asked. This post was made on the same day that an 11-year-old boy, this boy in California, committed suicide right on his Zoom call. His 13-year-old sister found him. I said, please leave your comments to discuss big education shaming parents and the impact 2020 is having on our children. And Eagle Nature came back and said this.
Whoever wrote that post is not very educated. I get that. I think that parents do have the right to believe in their children's abilities independently from others. There's a time and a place when the community comes together, but we still have independent lives. And the fact of the matter is, these kids have taken it hard. I mean, the number of child abuse reports have dropped in half because a lot of these kids are around people they can't get away from now. How do you make a report of child abuse? And as you mentioned, unfortunately, sadly, there's suicide of an 11-year-old. I mean, I think it's just terrible, Tudor.
I asked the President-elect Vern, this is what he had to say. We need private education systems with accountability to parents, get the government out of education. So many people agree with this. The problem is, obviously, if you have tax dollars going to it, government's involved. It's a tough situation to try to privatize education, Steve.
Oh, if you take a government check, there's a string attached, usually 6 or 8 of them. Here is Steve C.H. Sadly, the results of the NEA's failed oversight or possibly an indoctrination could be the key reason for the rise of groups such as Antifa and BLM. Now, we have children ending their own lives. How long do we wait, America? How long do we wait, America? I think it's a great question.
And like I said, people are just as fired up as I was. This is Carol H. 32628. How sad. Where are the leaders of this country? They are responsible for this and all the mess that's going on. One day they might realize the damage that they contributed to. May the God of comfort comfort the parents. It really is a sad situation. And you have Dr. Fauci who keeps waffling. I want kids in school, take kids out of school. We want to have this, but we don't want to have this. This is confusing governors across the country, I think.
Yeah, let's be honest, kids are in school all around the world, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, everywhere but the United States. All right, let's end on a happy note, shall we? The beef with the beef. Watch this little clip of video here. You're going to like it. The farmer didn't like it so much. Yikes! That was one mad cow. I wonder what that guy said to the cow there.
This is a fireman. I don't know why. This is why men don't live as long as women. Why are you out there with a cow? And was he trying to ride it? We need to play this again. What is happening? Get away from the cattle, people. This is your Friday. Stay tuned. The National Pulse is next. We'll miss you all weekend.
Welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com, here on Real America's Voice. Breaking news in this hour from Georgia. And we have our correspondents down there in the form of John Fredericks and the John Fredericks Radio Network, Heather Mullins for Real America's Voice. I want to bring you the footage that has just been shown at the hearings with Mayor Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and the rest of the team down there in Georgia. Explosive evidence of something that the left is not going to be able to easily deny. Let's roll the clip.
Pull this back and show it to you. There you go. So now they're going to start pulling these ballots out from under this table. This table, the black one, was placed there by the lady with the blonde braids at about 8:22 a.m. in the morning. So she put that table there. So the same person who's staying behind now, the same person who cleared the place out under the pretense that we're going to stop counting, is the person who put the table there at 8:22 in the morning. Yeah, I saw 4 suitcases come out from underneath the table. Yeah, upper right hand, you see the gentleman in the red. So he just pulled one out. So what are these ballots doing there, separate from all the other ballots? And why are they only counting them whenever the place is cleared out with no witnesses? Is the question. So these machines can process about 3,000 ballots an hour. You have multiple machines there, and they're there for 2 hours. So you do the math. How many ballots went through those machines in those 2 hours when there was no one there to supervise, to be present, consistent with your statutes and rules, to supervise the tabulation? We believe that could easily be, and probably is certainly, beyond the margin of victory in this race.
Let's bring in Heather Mullins, who's down in Georgia for Real America's Voice, to discuss this with us. Heather, explosive new footage being revealed in Georgia today. This really does underscore why Trump's supporters, people who wanted real evidence and real court hearings, wanted this done quickly, because we're fast approaching certification deadlines. We're fast approaching the deadlines for this race to be, officially called us over December the 8th, the safe harbor date, 14th, and on. And this evidence is just now coming to light. What are we seeing here?
Well, so we know that the Fulton County, right, where State Farm Arena, where that footage came from. This is Fulton County, the largest county in the state of Georgia. In fact, 10% of the vote came from this county. Now, the election board was asked to send their election director to speak here at 11 o'clock this morning, but the chair in there that's chairing this meeting said that they received notice he was unable to make it. That's Rick Barron, the election director, said he could not make it today because he was reconciling something to do with the ballots for the deadline that they just had to have the rescan for. But who did show up was the Fulton County Board of Commissioners chair, Rob Pitts, who actually said in his testimony this morning that he gives Fulton County an A+ for how they handled the election, saying nothing went wrong, there was zero evidence, and now we're seeing this video, which according to them in there just came out. So the Secretary of State's office hasn't even had a chance to review it yet, but it is pretty telling when you see that there are these boxes coming out from underneath a table, and that these ballots were being scanned in after hours, after allegedly observers were told to go home at approximately 8:30. Now, the other thing is, this same chair, Rob Pitts, said earlier he was not there, but according to the woman that played that video, there's an affidavit from someone stating he was actually there when everybody was told to go home.
So what we're dealing with here is, I think there's 4 suitcases that were secreted under a black cloth under a table, and that when poll watchers were dismissed, told to leave and told they could leave and that no more counting would take place, these 4 suitcases, ostensibly full of ballots, were pulled out and counted, Heather?
So that's what they're saying. That's what it appears like. She also did mention that one of those 4 people, I forget the role she had, but she was there earlier in the day wearing different clothing. And it was the woman with the yellow braids that she said later came back and was one of those 4 people, but was wearing a different outfit. So I'm not quite sure how the boxes got under there. They said they just got this footage, and in order to properly review it, it's 14 hours long. So they'd have to continue to investigate 14 hours worth of footage before they can give any more clear explanation as to how that box ended up there.
Heather, in your experience, having looked at all of these elections across the country, having watched elections take place before, in everything that we know about elections, is it normal practice to pull out 4 suitcases of ballots from under a table after poll watchers have left the room?
I would say it's not normal practice, and I would say that the Fulton County Election Board should be here answering questions. Rick Barron should be here owning up to Georgians and people that want some answers. But what we're seeing is the people that should be answering the questions are not showing up when asked.
That's absolutely true. We'll be keeping a close eye on it. Heather, we thank you for coming and joining us with an update on the ground. I know you're studying the hearings all day long. You'll be back on Real America's Voice later on today. Thank you again, Heather Mullins from Georgia.
Thank you, Raheem.
All right. Well, you see it with your very own eyes, and look, maybe there's some explanation, but extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that is some extraordinary evidence that we're seeing. The Election Integrity Project's Ellen Swenson is going to be joining us in the next section of this show to talk about what they're finding in California, in Nevada. We'll ask her if it's normal practice to find suitcases full of ballots. We have the video up at thenationalpulse.com. We're going to be playing it over and over again throughout this show. Maybe there's some credible explanation as to why 4 suitcases were pulled out from under a table and the ballots counted in Georgia after poll watchers have been told they could leave the room, in fact, dismissed. Maybe there is a reasonable explanation. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear it really quickly because what's going on down in Georgia right now with Republicans at each other's throats and establishment Republicans not wanting to keep this fight up, well, this should galvanize every single person out there who had any semblance of doubt that there is at least At the very least, we should not be declaring this race over. I won't. Not until all of these claims have been fully investigated. And as days go on and days go by, more and more and more evidence comes out. More and more statistical analyses show just how weird, anomalous this election was. You heard from Patrick Basham yesterday from the Democracy Institute here on this show. They got 2016 bang on, their polling, bang on. And he said, hey, look, if there was this kind of swing to Biden that nobody thought was going to happen, but it happened, it would have happened in a far more uniform manner than just in the places that he really needed to, bang in the middle of the night. I want to bring Ellen Swenson on here from the Election Integrity Project. That's not the Transition Integrity Project. I have to say that every time now because Rosa Brooks and Niels Gilman kind of tried to steal your name, Ellen, but you guys have been doing amazing work for years and years and years, well before those charlatans came along. The Election Integrity Project focusing in on Nevada and California. But just before we get to the latest from you guys, I want to ask you, you've been doing this for a while now, studying elections, you know them inside out, how they work. In your life, in your career, have you ever seen it? Is it normal to find ballots stuffed in suitcases, pulled out from under a table, and counted after poll watchers have left the room?
Well, it shouldn't be normal, but unfortunately, we also heard that story, I think it was in New York, just that suddenly these ballots appear. What I think has been going on is sort of this manufactured chaos. You throw ballots out there willy-nilly, you don't have a clean list. And then, lo and behold, if something does show up, it's more plausible, because it's such a mess. Versus if we treated our ballots like they should be, which would be like, I call it gold in Fort Knox, this wouldn't be allowed. Suddenly you wouldn't have a box of ballots or a suitcase of ballots there because they would all be accounted for, locked up, and secured. But we're not treating them. We're treating them, way less than gold, certainly.
Well, they put them in on the back of lorries or trucks, as you call them. They put them, in the street. These gaylords that are in the street that you just pop your piece of paper into. They're sent in the mail. They don't have the security envelopes in them. They're stored in warehouses, stored in the back of cars. This is not treated. I mean, the left is constantly telling us how important democracy is, how we should guard it with our lives. I'm more of the Constitution should be guarded with your life, and the Republic should be guarded with your life. Democracy is a form of voting, right? Democracy is it's not a system of government. It's a method of electing a government. But let's take the left at their word. Democracy is the be-all and end-all. Democracy dies in darkness. Democracy is what it's all about. Defending the vote. So why are you stuffing ballots in suitcases and hiding them underneath tables in unsecure buildings, right? That doesn't make any sense.
It does. And also, as we've seen in California and Nevada, they've been sending them to people who don't exist, people who are died. And so again, these stray ballots are out there. And then when you don't have what was promised, which was the signature matching, then all bets are off. What was a road to fraud is a superhighway now.
Ellen, so tell us about what you guys have been finding out. More coming out of Nevada, and of course, there's going to be a whole lot more, I believe, taking place in Nevada tomorrow. Another hearing tomorrow, which I'm just getting the news about.
Yes, I've heard that too. I think that's the Republican Party. And I think Trump is going today. I believe my head's in data so much I'm losing track right now.
Well, we're glad that your head is in the data, because somebody's head needs to be. Just before we get back to my question, actually, let me just make a comment on something you said a moment ago that just reoccurred to me. Is you're talking about how everything's everywhere and it's higgledy-piggledy, and that makes the burden of proof so much higher for proving fraud, and that's kind of why they do it, is that the mountain that you have to climb, and that's why I'm glad that your head is buried in the data. You are climbing that mountain every day. So tell us what you're finding along the way.
Okay, so I'm the chief analyst for Election Integrity California, as well as Election Integrity Project Nevada. And so we have both sets of data from both states, of the entire state, in terms of voter lists and their voting histories and so on. So what we've done is we've merged those two data sets and we've looked for matching people who are registered in both states. We've used, they have the same phone number. Their California mailing address is their Nevada registration address. And then we also have an additional bucket of people who match on name and phone number, birth date only, but they have exceptionally rare names. And so that tells us that's the same person. We have probably over 20,000 of those people, and maybe more actually, who are registered in both states. But what we did is we took a subset and we said how many of those are registered in Nevada and California, but their later registration date is California, indicating that they are actually California residents now. And how many of those voted in the Nevada election? That's our first cut. And so we found 2,410 of those people who voted in the Nevada election on November 3rd, though it appears to us they are California residents and they do not meet the federal or Nevada residency laws to vote in Nevada. So we just come out with that yesterday.
Wow. And this is the story. I believe we've got it up in the breaking section at the National Pulse. I think Natalie Winters popped it up late last night. So what just remind the audience, what's the difference in Nevada between Trump and Biden?
I don't know. I know it's a relatively small number. I don't know. Again, I mix the states up because I'm so involved in the data right now that I need to focus on. But it's small enough that they're trying to fight it.
I think it's about 40,000, isn't it? It's about 40,000. Does that sound about right to you?
Possibly. The 2,400 is not going to change the result.
Yeah.
We've submitted it to the Trump campaign, and so we don't know what'll happen. But
Ellen, hang on. We've got to go to a break. Let's come back. We'll reset, and you can tell us more about that. We'll be right back after this break. So the point is there's about a 40,000 vote gap in Nevada. And while what we're talking about here with Ellen Swenson from the Election Integrity Project wouldn't be enough to flip that in and of itself, the point is if a rudimentary, I don't want to call their work rudimentary, but compared with like a forensic, full-on federal AG Barr investigation into all of this stuff, if you could find 2,500 things that don't make sense in this, pull in extra resources, start looking at these things, dedicate the right resources to it, you might find that that's pretty easily overturned, in fact, and we don't even know. I mean, look, let me read you something before we bring Ellen back in here. So there's this new mail-in voter survey that was recently conducted in Nevada, a survey done by Basilich and Associates of mail-in voters only. And there's two stunning data points that come out of this. Number one, 1% of those people who were surveyed didn't think that they had voted. Now remember, we're not 6 months after the election here. We're not 6 years after. I mean, faulty recall is a thing that people have to pollsters and surveyors, they bear in mind, but not this close after an election. You don't mail a ballot 6, 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, maybe, and then go, yeah, did I? I don't know. I don't think I did. No, you would remember doing that, especially given that this election is on everybody's television screens, computer screens, cell phone screens, every single day. It's at the top of a lot of people's minds, and it should be. To get 1%, that's between 3,000 and 7,000 votes there in and of itself, right? And then you've got 2% who told the pollsters that they didn't receive a ballot in the mail at all. But these are the people who were registered as mail-in ballots and whose ballots were counted. So, Ellen, those are, 1 and 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but when the margin's 40,000 and the numbers are big enough, that actually suddenly does become enough.
Yep. So all these things add up, I think. There's what we're finding and then what other people are finding, all those adding up, and then, like you said, a more in-depth investigation could expose a lot more. What we're going to do next is we have this group of at least 20,000 people we believe are registered in both states. So we're going to next look at the people who appear to be living in Nevada now who voted in California, because we have California data we just got in. And then we're also going to be looking at if anybody voted in both states, and that's definitely a felony. And we will be, submitting that to law enforcement if we find that. So and we're being conservative. There's a lot more that we leave on the table, but common names, for example, we don't have enough information to prove that that's the same person because it's a common name and it could be a coincidence. Right. So we don't report those. But if with further research by the actual election officials, you would probably find a lot more.
Right. Ellen, anything more we should know? And especially I want to make sure that you give the website so that people can help out, donate. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's important that we're all focused on the presidential, but these issues affect the down ballot. So right now there's a Senate District 6 out of Clark County, a state Senate, that it's only 600 votes apart. Yeah. And in terms of the final result, but we have 124 of these cross-state voters who voted in that district. And so that's very close and could be turned over with some further research.
Ellen, the website for the Election Integrity Project?
Yeah, it's EIP-ca.com.
All right, and thank you so much, not just for your time today, but for all the hard work that you guys are doing. I understand that, I am not a mathematics person. My maths teacher at school often used to lament the fact that I would distract the rest of the class because I just couldn't pay attention to what was going on the blackboard. And I'm so grateful there are people like you out there who can bear to go through some of this stuff, because I found it incredibly difficult over the last couple of weeks. So thank you, Ellen, for everything that you and the Election Integrity Project are doing. Thank you. Have a good day. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to be able to take you to the hearings live to show you what's being said in Georgia. I wonder if we can take that feed live to you. I think we can. I think we're prepping it right now. So stick around, stay tuned. We're going to bring you that. We're going to have John Fredericks, who's live in Georgia, joining us later on in the show as well. We're going to keep talking about this footage that has come out of these ballots that were secreted, hidden, stashed in suitcases underneath tables in the Staples Center and brought out after the people had left the counting room. Let's take you live to the audio and the video from the Georgia hearing right now.
Ballots before I put them in this suitcase that's just in the middle of the room. And she kind of questioned, and then I went over one day and I pulled out a stack of ballots out of that case that was unattended, that was 8 inches high. So throughout the day, I put them next to me and I just started tearing them because I could tear more than mark each one through and spoil the ballots. The next day, the girl who was over me, she came to me and she said that she spoke to the head Dominion girl and that what I was doing was correct, that they were way too loose with the ballots in the warehouse. But there was no directive for anybody else to spoil ballots. And I never went back in the suitcase and pulled out extra ballots. Then on Friday, when early voting concluded, I was just working at my little station, and some other tech poll workers that were trained like me came up and said, "Bridget, you're a manager, is this correct?" And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, they're just pulling out ballots. And they had brought all the tabulator scanners out from State Farm Arena and wheeled them in the warehouse. And I guess I should back up. The warehouse was run by Dominion people because the Fulton County employees had a COVID outbreak. So they were all quarantined, 24 of them. So this was all run by Dominion software people. And I realized they probably have never worked an election and they don't know the security and the preciousness of a ballot, of someone's vote. So I went over to look at the situation with the co-workers, and I was quickly reprimanded and told, "Bridget, it's fine. We've been doing this all week." And I didn't know what to say because I had no authority. I was bothered by it, and I told the poll workers, I'm like, well, you know, the media card's what's really important. The paper ballots are just backups. So
all right,
it'll
quick
be okay.
break. We'll be back with more from the hearing here on Real America's Voice. Stick around, stay tuned, important stuff. Okay, welcome back to the National Pulse. I want to take you back into the room in Georgia where the hearings continue to take place. We'll have John Fredericks joining us in just a moment. Stick around and stay tuned for that. In the meantime, back to the room in Georgia.
Fulton guy who was printing ballots, I look over and I notice he's printing random ballots. I'm like, there's an order when you print test ballots. The purpose of a test ballot is so that you can vote for each candidate. So you either start from the top and vote for the first person all the way across, and then the second person, etc. This guy was just printing random ballots. And so I went over and instructed him, hey, to print test ballots, you got to do it this way. And he's like, oh, do I have to vote for Trump? I'm like, yeah, you got to vote for Trump. And then he started printing some ballots, and then he said he had to leave, so he left. And it was 10 o'clock at night, so I just finished up printing that batch of test ballots, ran it over to the person, and then I left. So then I'm also a precinct manager. So I manage the precinct and I'm concerned over the emergency ballots. You guys passed a law that 10% of every voter in the poll book, you have to have an emergency ballot. Well, in my precinct, I got yellow sample ballots. They were on yellow cheap paper, said sample across them. So I got 250 of these. So I called the warehouse. I said, where are my emergency ballots? I hope I don't need them, but where are they? And I took a picture, sent them a picture, and they're like, yeah, that's not right. And we don't know where they are. We can't find them. And in my training as a manager, I've never been trained the importance of securing the emergency ballots. When I've gone into the check-in center at the end of the night, there's no accountability. In the June election, they didn't even have forms when they checked us in. They didn't have ballot recap sheets, which is the most important thing you need as well, but they didn't have check-in forms to say, hey, you turned in all your provisional ballots that were unused. You turned in all your emergency ballots. There's no checking. The next election, you think, okay, that was the first time we used the system. Maybe they'll get it right. So the second time I went to check in, they had the old check-in forms with old language, DREs. And I'm like, okay, I'll sign off, but here's all my emergency ballots. Here's all my unused provisional ballots. So you think the third time they would get a form. I go to check in that night. They don't have forms. The girl at the Roswell check-in center said she just made one up. But there was nowhere on there to say, Bridget had 250 emergency ballots, and she's turned in those ballots. There's nowhere to say that my provisional ballots, I'm a split precinct, so I did have proper provisional ballots for my B precinct, but none for my A precinct. So that was concerning. And I did write my superior at Fulton County Elections, and she sent it on to her superiors, and I've not heard back about my concerns. I did send it to the Secretary of State. I sent my concerns prior to the election, and they were supposed to forward it on to the correct people. I went back to the Secretary of State after the election with my post-election concerns. I've not heard back from the Secretary of State. I attended the Board of Elections meeting this last week on Monday morning while I was in the airport, and I was going to give my testimony of securing the ballots, and I was muted 15 seconds into my presentation. So I feel like I'm not heard, or it's not a concern. I was also concerned about the Fulton County. Rob Pitts didn't mention to you this morning, but they had ACLU clerks in every single Fulton County location to process absentee ballots. I was concerned because my clerk was not trained. She was trained the day before. She seemed very intelligent. She's a lawyer. She wasn't trained to collect an affidavit if you're clearing an absentee ballot. I was also concerned that she was using her personal laptop, but I guess that's fine to have the whole voter database and who turned in absentee ballots and who didn't on your personal laptop. So those are just some of my concerns. I kind of went around, so I'm sure you have some questions.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any questions from any of the Senator Heath?
I don't want to jump ahead of any of you smart guys in here. You just a lot of information there that could.
I'm sorry.
There was a lot of information there that could certainly cause me concern. But One of the last things you were talking about, these emergency ballots, and you mentioned the absentee ballots. So who all knows, if I request an absentee ballot, who all knows whether or not I have voted that absentee ballot?
In previous years, we would have to call downtown to Fulton County elections, and they would clear a voter to vote on the machines. In this election, there was a lot of snafus because there were so many absentee ballots sent out back in June. So the solution was to put an ACLU absentee clerk in every precinct that would do the job of the Fulton County people, because the phones would jam. And I would have 3 poll workers on the phone calling the 3 different lines, and we would just sit there and let it ring and ring and ring until someone got through. And then we'd clear our line of voters that we had so they could go vote on the machines. But I don't know, maybe that's public information of who has turned in their absentee ballot. It seems like if it was public information, then I would have loved to have been able to look it up myself on my phone.
Do you have any concern that if I knew which available absentee ballots were out there and uncast, that it might be a good opportunity to do whatever with, whether it was call them up and say, hey, you need to go vote today, or
you haven't turned in your ballot, can I come get it?
Can I come help you, or whatever? Help me with these emergency ballots. Is that what you called them?
Yes, emergency ballots.
So these are legitimate ballots?
Yes, supposedly.
All right, quick break. We'll come back with more from the hearing in Georgia. John Fredericks will join us. Stick around. Let's bring in the oracle of the deplorables. John Fredericks is in Georgia, and he's seeing what we're seeing. He's seeing it sooner. He saw the video that was shown of the suitcases of ballots that came out from under the table and were counted after poll watchers were told that they had to leave the room. I want to make sure that we play that video again so that people at home just tuning in can see. John, thanks for joining us here this afternoon. Is that accurate? Have I portrayed that accurately about the suitcases? You saw it almost before anybody else did.
Raheem, you absolutely displayed it correctly, and quite frankly, all of the fake news and the Democrats and others and many Republicans have been saying nothing to see here, no evidence. Well, you know what we got today right here at the Gold Dome in Atlanta, Georgia? We got a mountain of evidence in a video that the Giuliani lawyer team just got from a FOIA last night. And Raheem, in that video, it clearly shows that after they kicked everybody out and said ballot